Parents talking about a child that wasn't me on a random Sunday night when I was half asleep at the top of the stairs, grabbing water, and I probably would have ignored it if my mom hadn't said my name followed by the words, "He can never know." Because when you hear something like that, your brain doesn't let it go. So I stood there frozen, listening as my dad whispered that they should have told me years ago, and my mom snapped back that it was too late now, that I wouldn't understand, that it would ruin everything. And then she said it, the line that still messes with me years later. He thinks he's the only one. And I felt my stomach drop because I was an only child, or at least I thought I was. And as I stood there listening to them argue in hushed voices about what happened before, and the mistake, and how close it came to happening again, I realized they weren't talking hypothetically or emotionally. They were talking about something real, someone real. And the worst part was that they kept referring to this other child in the present tense, like they still existed somewhere. And when the floor creaked under my foot, my parents went silent instantly, like they'd rehearsed it. And my mom called out, asking if I was awake in the most normal, cheerful voice you can imagine, which scared me more than if she'd yelled. So I lied and said I was just getting water and went back to my room pretending everything was fine, even though my hands were shaking. And over the next few weeks, I started noticing things I'd never questioned before. Why there were 2 toothbrush holders in the guest bathroom, even though no one ever stayed over. Why my parents locked the garage door even when the car was inside. Why my mom panicked anytime I mentioned getting a DNA test for fun. And eventually I did what any desperate, sleep-deprived person would do and went digging through old boxes in the attic where I found hospital paperwork with my last name but not my first, dated 2 years before I was born. And a blurry photo of a toddler standing in our backyard wearing a jacket I recognized from my own baby photos. And when I confronted my parents, they completely shut down. My dad went pale. My mom started crying. And they told me the truth in pieces, like ripping off bandages slowly, explaining that before me there was another child, my older brother, who had severe behavioral issues that doctors later called something else, but back then just called unmanageable. And when he hurt someone outside the family, my parents made a choice that still haunts them. A choice to give him up quietly through connections my grandfather had, to place him somewhere they believed was safer for everyone. And they told themselves it was temporary, then necessary, then merciful. And then they had me. And they buried the past so deeply, they convinced themselves it never existed. Except it did. Because years later, they started getting letters with no return address, asking simple questions like, is he healthy? And does he sleep okay? And finally, one envelope arrived with just a photo inside. A grown man standing in front of a familiar street sign. My street sign. And that's when they realized he hadn't disappeared. He'd been watching from a distance, respecting their silence until he wasn't sure anymore whether I knew. And the night I overheard them talking was the night they'd found another note taped to the inside of the garage door that said, he deserves the truth. And the reason they never told me wasn't because they didn't love me, but because they were terrified that once I knew about him, I'd want to meet him. And once I met him, I'd realize something they'd tried very hard to forget. That I wasn't their first attempt at a family, I was their second chance. And the last thing my mom said before she broke down was, we don't know what he'd do if you rejected him too. And even now, years later, I still check over my shoulder when I pull into the driveway. Because sometimes there's a car parked down the street that I don't recognize. And sometimes I swear I see someone standing just out of view, like they're waiting to see if I'll ever come looking for them.